Join our family of creators. Your support means the world to us. Subscribe now to the Content Creator channel. Your support keeps us motivated and helps us bring you fresh, exciting content every week. Hit that subscribe button and be part of our journey. Has a single presidential decree ever held the potential to so profoundly reshape the global energy map and challenge a rising power's economic trajectory? This is the central question facing New Delhi today, in the wake of President Donald Trump's recent and dramatic decision to reinstate a comprehensive ban on Russian oil imports to the United States. This move, announced in the spring of 2025, has sent shockwaves not just through Moscow and Washington, but across the entire world, creating a complex web of economic and geopolitical challenges. For a nation like India, which has carefully cultivated its relationship with Russia as a cornerstone of its energy security, the implications are particularly severe and far-reaching, forcing a difficult and urgent reassessment of its foreign policy and economic strategy. The decision has thrust India into an unenviable position, caught between its long-standing strategic partner in Russia and its increasingly vital relationship with the United States. The ban is not merely a trade policy. It is a powerful statement of intent from a Trump administration determined to reassert American influence and economically isolate its adversaries. For India, the stakes are incredibly high. The nation's booming economy, its industrial growth, and the daily lives of its 1.4 billion citizens are all deeply dependent on a stable and affordable supply of imported crude oil. The ban itself is a straightforward yet severe economic measure. In May of 2025, the Trump administration, citing ongoing security concerns and a desire to cripple Russia's economic engine, signed an executive order prohibiting the importation of Russian crude oil, petroleum products, liquefied natural gas, and coal into the United States. This move marked a significant escalation of economic pressure, going beyond the sanctions that were already in place. It was a clear and unambiguous signal that Washington intended to use its economic might to punish Moscow. The order was not just a symbolic gesture. It was designed to directly target the primary source of revenue for the Russian state, aiming to limit its capacity to fund its military and project influence on the global stage. The stated rationale from the White House was multifaceted, blending national security arguments with a broader ideological push against what it terms autocratic regimes. Administration officials argued that continuing to purchase Russian energy was tantamount to funding a strategic competitor's ambitions, which they deemed unacceptable. This policy reflects a core tenet of the Trump doctrine, an America-first approach that prioritizes unilateral action and is unafraid to disrupt established international norms to achieve its objectives, even if it creates friction with allies. For the rest of the world, the ban came with an implicit warning. The United States is prepared to use its economic leverage to enforce its foreign policy goals, and other nations may be expected to align with its position. The move is a stark reminder that in today's interconnected world, a single policy decision made in one capital can have profound and immediate effects on the economic well-being of nations thousands of miles away. The immediate consequence of the American ban on Russian oil was a predictable and dramatic surge in global crude prices. When a major supplier is effectively removed from a significant market, the basic laws of supply and demand take over. With the United States no longer buying Russian crude, it had to turn to other producers to meet its needs, increasing competition for available barrels from the Middle East, Africa, and North and South America. This sudden spike in demand for non-Russian oil sent prices for benchmarks like Brent and West Texas Intermediate soaring. Almost overnight, the delicate balance of the global energy market was upended, creating a period of intense volatility and uncertainty for traders, investors, and consumers worldwide. This price shock was not confined to the oil markets alone. It had a cascading effect across the global economy. Higher crude prices mean higher transportation costs for everything from food to manufactured goods, fueling inflationary pressures that were already a concern in many countries. The ban essentially bifurcated the oil market, a discounted market for Russian crude, accessible only to those willing to defy U.S. pressure, and a much more expensive market for everyone else. This created a two-tiered system that rewarded risk-takers, but punished those who adhered to the American-led sanctions regime. The ban also placed immense pressure on OPEC+, the organization of the petroleum exporting countries and its allies, including Russia. The cartel found itself in a complex position. The United States began exerting significant diplomatic pressure on key OPEC members like Saudi Arabia and the UAE to increase their production to help stabilize prices and offset the loss of Russian barrels from the global market. For the world, the ban has served as a stark lesson in the fragility of global energy supply chains. It has highlighted how dependent the international economy is on a small number of major oil-producing nations, and how vulnerable it is to geopolitical shocks. The Trump administration's decision has therefore not only driven up prices, but also injected a new level of political risk into the energy market, forcing every country to reconsider its energy security strategy in this new and more contentious environment. India's decision to dramatically increase its purchases of Russian oil was born out of economic necessity. As a nation that imports over 85% of its crude oil requirements, India is exceptionally vulnerable to fluctuations in global energy prices. When Western sanctions following events in the early 2020s made Russian oil available at a significant discount, Indian refiners saw a golden opportunity. What began as a trickle of imports soon became a torrent. By early 2025, before the latest US ban, Russia had solidified its position as India's single largest supplier of crude oil, accounting for over a third of the country's total oil imports. This was a staggering transformation from just a few years prior, when Russian oil made up less than 2% of India's import basket. This energy relationship is built on a foundation of mutual benefit. For Russia, finding a large and reliable buyer like India was crucial to weathering Western sanctions and keeping its economy afloat. For India, the benefits were even more direct. The discounted Russian crude provided a much-needed cushion against soaring global prices, saving the country billions of dollars in import costs. The ties go beyond simple commercial transactions. They are intertwined with a long history of strategic and diplomatic cooperation between New Delhi and Moscow. This historical relationship, dating back to the Cold War, has given India a level of comfort and trust in dealing with Russia that it may not have with other suppliers. However, this heavy reliance on a single supplier, especially one under intense international scrutiny, comes with significant risks. The Trump administration's ban has brought these risks into sharp focus. While the ban doesn't directly prohibit India from buying Russian oil, it creates immense diplomatic pressure and raises the prospect of secondary sanctions. It forces Indian policymakers and business leaders to weigh the immediate economic benefits of cheap Russian oil against the long-term strategic costs of antagonizing the United States, a critical partner in trade, technology, and defense. The once advantageous Russian connection has now become a major geopolitical vulnerability, a source of both economic relief and intense diplomatic anxiety for New Delhi. The economic impact of the US ban on India has been immediate and honestly, pretty multifaceted, creating a significant squeeze on the nation's finances. The primary effect is the rising cost of the country's overall energy import bill. Even though India continues to purchase discounted Russian crude, the global price surge for all other oil sources means that the total cost of energy has increased substantially. The discount on Russian oil is no longer sufficient to offset the higher prices India must pay for crude from its other major suppliers in the Middle East and Africa. This has put immense pressure on India's foreign exchange reserves and widened the country's trade deficit, which is a key indicator of economic health that the government watches very closely. This pressure extends directly to Indian industries, which are, heavily reliant on energy to power their operations. From manufacturing and construction to transportation and agriculture, rising fuel and energy costs translate into higher operating expenses. For example, the cost of diesel, which is basically the lifeblood of India's logistics and farming sectors, has risen, increasing the expense of transporting goods and running farm equipment. These increased costs are inevitably passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices for everyday goods and services. This contributes to broader inflationary pressures across the economy, threatening to slow down India's impressive post-pandemic growth trajectory and making it harder for businesses to plan for the future with any certainty. Indian oil refining companies, both state-owned and private, find themselves in a particularly precarious position. While they initially profited handsomely from processing cheap Russian crude and exporting refined products like gasoline and diesel, the new geopolitical climate has introduced significant risks. They face challenges in securing financing, insurance, and shipping for Russian oil cargoes, as international service providers become wary of falling foul of US sanctions. The fear of potential secondary sanctions from Washington could compel these companies to reduce their dependence on Russian crude, forcing them to buy more expensive oil from the open market and eroding their profit margins. Furthermore, the economic squeeze is impacting investor confidence. The uncertainty surrounding India's energy security and its diplomatic path forward creates a risky environment for both domestic and foreign investment. International investors may become hesitant to commit capital to a country that could potentially face sanctions from the United States. This could slow down capital flows into India, impacting everything from the stock market to large-scale infrastructure projects that are honestly vital for the country's development. The economic challenge for New Delhi is therefore not just about managing the immediate cost of oil, but also about navigating the broader economic fallout and maintaining its reputation as a stable and attractive destination for global investment. For the average Indian citizen, the complex geopolitics of global oil markets translate into a very simple and honestly painful reality: higher prices at the petrol pump. The cost of gasoline and diesel is a key household expense for millions of families, directly impacting their monthly budgets. When global crude prices rise, state-owned oil marketing companies in India have little choice but to pass on the increased cost to consumers. The recent surge in prices following the US ban has meant that filling up a motorcycle, car or scooter has become significantly more expensive. This directly reduces the disposable income of the middle class and puts an even greater strain on the finances of the poor, who often rely on two-wheelers for their livelihood. The impact goes far beyond just the cost of personal transportation. The price of diesel is a critical factor in the cost of almost all goods and services in India. The trucks that transport food from farms to cities, the tractors that plow the fields, and the buses that form the backbone of public transport all run on diesel. As its price increases, so does the cost of food, consumer goods, and public transport fares. This creates a ripple effect of inflation that is felt by every single citizen, regardless of whether they own a vehicle. For a family already struggling to make ends meet, the rising cost of essentials like vegetables, milk, and cooking gas can be devastating, forcing them to make difficult choices about their spending. This widespread inflation has a profound social and political impact. It erodes the purchasing power of wages and savings, leading to public frustration and discontent. The rising cost of living becomes a major topic of conversation in households, marketplaces, and on social media, often leading to public protests and putting immense pressure on the government to provide relief. The issue is particularly sensitive in a democracy like India, where the price of essential commodities can significantly influence public opinion and electoral outcomes. The government is acutely aware that its ability to manage inflation and cushion the public from price shocks is a key test of its performance and popularity among the masses. The human cost is also visible in the subtle changes in daily life. People may be forced to cut back on non-essential travel, reduce their use of household appliances, or switch to cheaper, less nutritious food items. Small business owners, such as street food vendors or local delivery services, see their profit margins shrink as their fuel costs rise, making it harder to sustain their operations. The dream of economic mobility, which is central to the aspirations of millions of Indians, can feel more distant when the basic cost of living is constantly on the rise. Ultimately, the consequences of a decision made in Washington are being paid for by ordinary people at petrol stations and grocery stores across India. The Indian government is currently engaged in a delicate and high-stakes diplomatic balancing act, a true tightrope walk between its economic needs and its geopolitical relationships. On one side is the undeniable economic logic of continuing to purchase discounted Russian oil. This trade provides a vital lifeline for the Indian economy, helping to control inflation, manage the trade deficit, and ensure energy security for its vast population. Officials in New Delhi have publicly defended these purchases, framing them as essential for the nation's well-being, and asserting India's right to make sovereign decisions based on its own national interest. On the other side is the immense pressure from the United States, its most important partner in many other domains. The US is a critical source of technology, a major export market, and a key strategic ally in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly in balancing the rising influence of China. Antagonizing Washington by openly defying its sanctions on Russia could jeopardize this crucial relationship. The risk of secondary sanctions, which could target Indian companies and financial institutions involved in the Russian oil trade, is a constant threat. Indian diplomats are therefore working tirelessly behind the scenes, engaging in quiet diplomacy with their American counterparts to explain India's position and seek a waiver or some form of understanding that allows the energy trade to continue without triggering a major diplomatic crisis. In response to this challenge, the Indian government has adopted a multi-pronged strategy. Publicly, it maintains a principled stance on its strategic autonomy. Internally, it is encouraging state-owned and private refiners to diversify their payment mechanisms, exploring options such as using non-dollar currencies like the rupee or dirham to settle trades with Russia. This is an attempt to insulate the transactions from the US-dominated global financial system. Furthermore, the government is actively seeking to diversify its sources of crude oil, stepping up diplomatic outreach to other major producers in the Middle East and Latin America to secure long-term supply contracts and reduce its over-reliance on any single supplier, including Russia. Simultaneously, Indian businesses are adapting to this new reality with a mix of caution and opportunism. While some larger corporations with significant exposure to Western markets may be scaling back their engagement with Russia to avoid risk, others are finding creative ways to navigate the complex environment of sanctions. This includes using smaller, less-known trading firms and rerouting shipments to obscure their origin. However, this shadow trade is fraught with its own risks, including a lack of transparency and the potential for sudden disruption. The overall strategy from both the government and the private sector is one of careful navigation, aiming to extract maximum economic benefit while minimizing geopolitical blowback, a tightrope walk that is becoming more difficult with each passing day. The current crisis, while challenging, is also serving as a powerful catalyst for India to accelerate its long-term energy transition. The extreme volatility in the global oil market and the geopolitical risks associated with fossil fuel imports have underscored the urgent need for India to reduce its dependence on foreign oil. The government has recognized that true energy security cannot be achieved by simply switching from one foreign supplier to another. It requires a fundamental shift towards domestic energy sources. This realization is breathing new life into India's ambitious, renewable energy goals. The focus is now not just on climate change mitigation, but on national security and economic stability, adding a powerful new impetus to the green transition. A central pillar of this long-term strategy is a massive expansion of solar and wind power capacity. India is blessed with abundant sunshine and significant wind potential, and the government is doubling down on policies to exploit these resources. This includes production-linked incentive schemes to boost domestic manufacturing of solar panels and wind turbines, aiming to reduce reliance on imported components, particularly from China. Large-scale solar parks and offshore wind farms are being planned and executed with renewed urgency. The goal is to create a robust domestic renewable energy ecosystem that can power India's growth, create green jobs, and insulate the economy from price shocks in the global oil market. Beyond solar and wind, India is also exploring a diversified portfolio of clean energy technologies. Green hydrogen has emerged as a particularly promising area of focus. The National Green Hydrogen Mission aims to make India a global hub for the production and export of this clean fuel, which can be used to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors like steel, cement, and heavy transport. Significant investments are also flowing into improving the nation's electricity grid, developing energy storage solutions like batteries to ensure a stable supply from intermittent renewables, and promoting the adoption of electric vehicles. The push for EVs is seen as a key strategy to reduce oil consumption in the transport sector, which accounts for a large share of India's oil demand. This long-term vision, however, requires immense capital investment, technological innovation, and political will. The transition will not happen overnight, and in the interim, India will continue to rely on imported fossil fuels. The challenge for policymakers is to manage the immediate crisis without losing sight of the long-term goal. This means continuing the difficult diplomatic balancing act to secure affordable energy in the short term, while simultaneously creating a policy environment that attracts the massive investment needed to build the clean energy infrastructure of the future. The Trump ban on Russian oil may have created a short-term problem, but it has also provided the long-term clarity needed for India to decisively chart its path towards a more secure and sustainable energy future. In conclusion, the decision by the Trump administration to ban Russian oil imports has placed India at a critical crossroads, forcing it to confront fundamental questions about its economic stability, foreign policy, and long-term energy security. The immediate impact has been a painful economic squeeze, characterized by a rising import bill, persistent inflation, and increased costs for both industries and ordinary citizens. The discounted Russian crude that once served as an economic shield has now become a source of significant geopolitical risk, pushing New Delhi into a precarious diplomatic position between its historical ally, Russia, and its vital strategic partner, the United States. The situation has laid bare the vulnerabilities inherent in India's heavy dependence on imported fossil fuels. The Indian government's response has been a pragmatic, if challenging, tightrope walk. It has sought to defend its national interest by continuing the economically vital energy trade with Moscow, while simultaneously engaging in careful diplomacy to mitigate the fallout with Washington. This strategy of multi-alignment is being tested like never before. The crisis has forced India to become more creative in its trade and payment mechanisms, and has reinforced the need for diversification of its energy suppliers. However, these are short-term fixes to a problem that demands a long-term solution, highlighting the limitations of relying on a volatile and highly politicized global energy market for national growth and stability. Perhaps the most significant and lasting consequence of this episode will be the renewed and urgent impetus it provides for India's transition to clean energy. The crisis has transformed the push for renewables from an environmental goal into a national security imperative. The path forward for India is clear. It must aggressively pursue its ambitious targets for solar, wind, green hydrogen, and electric mobility to build a resilient and self-reliant energy system. This transition will be long and expensive, but the events of 2025 have demonstrated that the cost of inaction and of remaining tethered to the geopolitics of oil is far greater. The future of India's economy no longer lies in barrels of imported crude. Ultimately, this moment represents both a profound challenge and a historic opportunity for India. How the nation navigates the immediate pressures will define its international standing in the years to come. But more importantly, how it leverages this crisis to accelerate its journey towards a sustainable and independent energy future will determine its economic destiny for decades. The path is difficult, but the destination, a secure, prosperous, and energy-independent India, is a goal that transcends the turbulent politics of the present moment. The choices made today will shape the India of tomorrow, hopefully one powered less by geopolitical gambles and more by its own abundant natural resources.